Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about all of the different things happening with tampering in the sport. Ohio State was kind of the center of this world when we talked about Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. A lot of it's going to have to be figured out, and frankly, I'll get back to this Anthony comment because I think it's absolutely fascinating and definitely something that we'll probably get in a little bit more detail later this week. But Roger Goodell getting involved, the NFL getting involved in this thing, I think all of us understand that we are heading towards a minor league football program. When you're talking about college football, it's already essentially that, but in a little bit more aggressive terms, it will be a minor league NFL product, and it's not the worst idea in the world for those two entities to work together. It's not. It would definitely help out scheduling and not have those crazy overlaps that you absolutely hate. It would make a lot of sense. And it's not necessarily my ideal way going forward, but as long as he has the right guys around him that know college football, you can make this happen very quickly, and you can make it happen in a very, very good respect. So that's definitely something to watch and something that I'll unpack tomorrow and maybe later in the week in a little bit more detail. But let's take an early look at this 2025 NFL draft. It's a weird one. I'll be totally honest with you guys. It's a very, very weird class we have sitting in front of us because not necessarily quarterback driven. It's not a class where you're going to be watching the quarterbacks every single time they go out on the field. Obviously, those will be the guys that will get a lot of press. There's no doubt about that. They always do. But there's tons of other guys. You talk about Travis Hunter. You talk about Abdul Carter and Mason Graham and Will Johnson. There's going to be some special players that are taken in the top 10 that could be very, very interesting to watch going down the road. And Anthony, you bring in a rumor about Shedeur Sanders, and let's talk about those quarterbacks and see where they could possibly go. So you have the two guys up top, and these are Mel Kiper's rankings, not my rank. Oh, excuse me. I think I flipped those two. Shedeur Sanders should be number one, Cam Ward number two. Apologies for that. Kind of mix those two up right there. But overall, those two guys up top are the two guys up top. I don't know if there's really any question about that. Maybe there's some guys that could kind of knock them off their pedestal depending on the way that they look throughout the first couple of workouts. I'd be surprised if I'm being totally honest. I think those are the two guys that you're going to see. I think those are almost guaranteed first rounders. I think they will go in the first round. Anthony says there could be Shedeur falling out of the first 10. I'd be a little bit surprised if I'm being totally honest, but definitely will be something to watch, and we can get into that in a little bit more detail as we get to the teams that are picking in the top 10. But beyond that, you got Jackson Dart, you got Jalen Milroe, who I probably would rank a little bit lower, and we'll get into that later in the week. And then you got Kyle McCord, Will Howard, Quinn Ewers, Dylan Gabriel, Curtis Rourke, Tyler Shuck, and you also have Riley Leonard, not on this list, but right off it. So a very fun group, a group that is really hard to pin down in a lot of different respects. You have Shedeur Sanders and Travis Ward, two guys that I think are going to go in the first round. I cannot feel confident that they're going to be long-term NFL quarterbacks. Both are very, very talented, but both have the same issue that Caleb Williams had coming out, and neither of them have the outright athletic ability that Caleb Williams has. So that's going to be something to watch, and definitely something that could kind of impede them throughout the process. I've said a couple of times on here, I think there's going to be at least two or three other guys that go in the first round. You're more than welcome to try to figure out who those guys are, because I have no earthly idea. Now, I do think Jalen Milroe's catching enough juice in the kind of NFL world right now. We'll see what happens in those throwing drills in the combine, but definitely someone to watch here. I think Will Howard, someone that could find their way up into the first round, depending on the way that he goes throughout his process. And then Quinn Ewers, definitely a guy that has all the ability in the world, definitely has some issues that he has to figure out, but given the right system, Pete Carroll was just hired over at the Raiders. That could be a fit. That could work very, very nicely. I think the Rams could work very nicely, as well as the 49ers. So definitely some teams to watch around him. I don't know if he's a first rounder. I think he's an early second rounder, late first rounder, if I'm being totally honest, but not really sure where he's going to fall. Definitely a guy that will be all over the rankings as you get deeper. And then Dylan Gabriel, Curtis Rourke, Tyler Shuck, all going to be later round draft picks if I had to imagine, but all guys that I think could develop into some really good quarterbacks at the very next level. Yeah, and we'll talk about that here in a second, Anthony, what all these teams are going to do possibly. But overall, let's get into the top non-quarterback offensive players. I did include Travis Hunter over here. I just think he's going to play a little bit more wide receiver. I battle back and forth on that, if I'm being totally honest. I think it kind of depends on the team that he goes to, but I have a team in mind that I think he's going to go to, so we'll talk about that here in a second. And then Tedariah McMillan, incredible, incredible player, absolutely. Ashton Genty is going to be the number one running back off the board, and we'll talk about my running back rankings. I have probably a little bit different than a lot of people have out there in that respect. And then you do have Kelvin Banks, you have Will Campbell, you do have Josh Simmons, all elite offensive tackles, all guys that will go in the first round. Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren will go in the first round, absolutely. I really love what Colston Loveland could bring to a team. And then you do have Tyler Booker. Cannot say enough about Tyler Booker. I think he's one of my favorite guys going into this draft, and I think he's going to be a 15-year starter at guard for someone. Just an absolutely forceful guy that is going to make all types of big-time plays. And then Luther Burden's that guy that you just want to see succeed, if I'm being totally honest. I think there's a lot of talk around him and the Bengals with possibly T. Higgins walking out the door. Obviously, that will develop over time, but it's going to be awesome to watch this group unfold, and definitely a group that will probably dominate the first round a little bit more so than those quarterbacks would, at least in years past. The Curtis Rourke question from Anthony here is a fun one because it's hard to define. You know, there's a number of different places that I think he would work very nicely in. I think one to kind of watch kind of out of the corner of your eye is maybe Seattle. They just hired Clint Kubiak up there. I think when you have Geno Smith right in front of him, sort of a similar quarterback. Curtis Rourke might not be quite as, physically gifted as what Geno Smith is, but I do think it's a system where he takes 1 year, 2 years to figure that thing out and then hits the ground running. I think he could be a really fun player, no doubt about that. And Loveland, he reminds me of every elite defense or elite blocking tight end, and George Kittle is a great comp for him. I think he's one of those guys that is as polished of a route runner as you're going to find at that position in quite some time, if I'm being totally honest. If Brock Bowers didn't come out last year, we'd be talking about this guy a lot more as we head up to this thing. But going to be really interesting to watch all of that unfold. Obviously, a ton of things to really get into for the defensive side of the ball. Abdul Carter's number one. He will likely be my number one prospect. He might not be my number one pick, but definitely will be my number one prospect. And then you got Mason Graham, you got Will Johnson from Michigan, elite players, and then you got the little bit of a Georgia run. You got Jalen Walker, Mykel Williams, and Malachi Starks, all guys that I expect to go in the first round. Nick Imamwari is definitely an interesting guy to watch because you do have some guys beyond this list like say a Jade Barron or a couple of different guys that could possibly take that realm from him, but definitely a very talented guy. I'd expect him to go in the first round, but could change just a little bit over the next little bit. Jahad Campbell is a guy I love. I think he's going to be a 10-year NFL vet at linebacker. Cannot wait to see where he goes. Shamar Stewart's the guy that's really catching my eyes a little bit more as we go throughout this process. Definitely a guy that I think can be an immediate starter for wherever you need, really. And then Siobhan Revel Jr. is a guy you're going to want to watch from ECU, cornerback, very talented, very fast, very rangy. He's going to make a lot of plays and definitely be a guy that maybe won't be the first he won't be the first cornerback off the board. Very well could be the second or third. Will be awesome to see what he can do. You know what? That makes sense to me, if I'm being totally honest, Anthony. I think Mason Graham and Abdul Carter, two Hall of Famers, as far as I'm concerned. I look at those two guys play football. It's very hard to figure out a way where they are not going to dominate at the next level. So I'm all the way with you. I think both those guys are downright elite. I think you're splitting hairs when you talk about those two elite talents. One coming off the edge, one in the interior. It would be incredible to watch what would happen when it's not going to happen. In my dream, having those two guys on one defensive line would be incredible to watch. But overall, it's going to be awesome to see what happens here. And then it's a group that, or defensively, it's a group that I very much love, and there's so much talent on the back end. And then you get into the top 10 picks. You get Tennessee Titans going number one overall. I have to assume it's going to be one of the quarterbacks. Now, they did say they wouldn't pass over a generational talent. I think Travis Hunter fits that bill. Frankly, I think Abdul Carter kind of fits that bill as well. So I do think there's a lot, and Mason Graham might fit that bill if I'm being totally honest. So there's a couple of different guys that possibly could throw a curveball here. I expected to be the first quarterback off the board. Right now, it seems like Cam Ward might have the inside track there. For the Browns, if it's not Travis Hunter, he went number one. That's really the only reality that I see here. If it's not Travis Hunter going to Cleveland at number two, it means that he went number one to Tennessee, and I don't think there's any other reality, if I'm being totally honest. Now, the Browns need a quarterback. They don't have the money to go get a quarterback right now. So they're going to have to buy low somewhere in free agency, and they're just going to have to trust that they can figure it out in 2026. So I think it's going to be Travis Hunter, get that baseline, get that elite player, and then move from there. For the Giants, I think you see a lot of offensive tackles start to go right about now. Whether it's the Giants that they're going to take a quarterback, excuse me. Once you get to the Patriots, you're going to get into some offensive tackle realm. You have Patriots, Jaguars, you have Saints, Bears, a couple other teams in there that absolutely could use some offensive tackle help. You'll see Kelvin Banks, Will Campbell, a lot of these guys, Josh Simmons, a lot of these guys start to go right around there, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. And maybe Tennessee does trade down. I do think there is an interesting reality where Tennessee's not quite as tied to the quarterback position as a lot of people seem to think around the NFL, and I don't necessarily think it's a slam dunk that they're going to take a quarterback. And if they're planning on taking Travis Hunter, not the worst idea in the world to trade down just a little bit, maybe give the Giants your pick, or maybe you might want to avoid the Browns altogether. So that's going to be kind of a precarious situation. But overall, I do think it's going to be one of those things where Titans probably have a little bit more leeway to not take a quarterback this time around, and it'll be interesting to see what they do in that respect, because that's going to be a battle one way or the other. But overall, the NFL draft's always a really fun thing for me. You get to blur the lines between college football and the NFL. You get to watch all of the players that you've just adored watching the last 4 years officially get their dream of having their name called on draft day. It's a really cool thing. There's no doubt about that. And it'll be awesome to see all of this unfold. We'll obviously get into a couple of more details throughout the week. I'll get into my quarterback rankings, into my, top 10, maybe top 15 picks, who knows. We'll go a little bit deeper possibly, but a lot of different things that are coming throughout the rest of this week. But you got some really interesting groups. There's no doubt about that. A quarterback class that is not necessarily all that incredible, at least on paper, and then Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Will Johnson, all those guys that are just freaks of nature on the defensive side of the ball. And just for fun, you might have one of the most influential football players of our time, and Travis Hunter getting maybe drafted number 1 overall, maybe drafted a little bit later. And let me get to this Dolphins comment right here. Yes, I totally understand that. Yeah, Shamar Stewart's one of those guys that you look around the edge rushers in this class, a lot of ability all across the board. A lot of guys that are very fast, that have really good hands, that do a lot of really great things. Shamar Stewart's the guy that he's going to walk in day one and be ready to roll. And not necessarily just in pass rush, but in run coverage, in setting the edge in a lot of different ways. He is the most physical guy at the edge rushing position as far as I'm concerned, and wouldn't be surprised if they put a very physical guy next to a Chop Robinson type that is going to get around the edge and wreak havoc on the quarterback. It's going to be really fun to watch what they do with that pick, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if it ended up being that guy across from apologies. I wouldn't be surprised if it was Shamar Stewart across from Chop Robinson next year. But it's going to be awesome to watch this unfold. The NFL draft's always that time of the year where a lot of different things happen, and a lot of different teams have different rankings, and you're going to see some picks that you do not expect by any means, and maybe it'll come number 1 overall. Maybe Travis Hunter will go number 1 overall, and then every other quarterback ranking is thrown into whack. So it'll be really interesting to unfold that. I'll get into my top 10 quarterbacks, my top 10 defenders, a lot of different rankings throughout the weekend. Maybe, just maybe, a little bit of a early mock draft on the first round. So we'll get into all of that throughout the week, but wanted to take a little 50,000 feet view of this, and then let's move on to a little teams to view. Teams with the most to prove as we head into 2025. Definitely some big time teams, and one that we've already talked about a little bit, but we'll get into them right after this, so stick with us.